Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a super interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Rike Cybertrix. Holy moly, talk about a unique design aesthetic. Wow. Yeah, before you say it, it does look like the Cybertruck. In fact, the designer was inspired by the Cybertruck. It says that right on the website, which I will link down in the description. I think at the moment of this upload, they are taking pre-orders. I know they sold out at least once. There's a few different blade shapes, but I'll link any and all information about this knife right down in the description so you guys can check it out. Thank you so much to, I think it was a few different people who green-lighted sending this to me. Thank you so much to the people who sent it to me. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. So, this is a Rike manufactured knife, but who actually designed it? If you're like me, you might have been a little bit confused by that, more or less anyway, but I want to get this right. The gentleman behind this knife is this person right here, Declynx. Right, and on Instagram, you can find him at king.freeman.x, and I recommend that you follow him. You might also be a little bit confused because there's a couple of other names that are attached to this thing, like Quechuo and Forever Steel. Quechuo is the website that you'll find this thing being sold on, but Quechuo is also its own brand. You'll find knives that are branded as Quechuo, and they're manufactured by Rike. You also might see some Forever Steel knives, which is apparently a direct partner with Declynx, but also having their own knives branded as Forever Steel and manufactured by Rike, which is very confusing. But I think I've got a handle on it. I really wanted to make sure that this was correct. I had made an Instagram post about this knife, and the designer was like, hey, I want to be mentioned as the designer. And that's, absolutely, that makes sense. So I wanted to make sense of all of these different names and brands and people so that you guys kind of understood where this came from. What an incredibly bizarre aesthetic. Some people will look at this and say beautiful. Some people will look at this and say hideous, right? I think it should be clear that the designer was clearly not trying to make something that was aesthetically appealing to everybody. I think the idea here was to make something that you would remember. This is going to be a very difficult knife to forget because it doesn't look like anything else on the market. And in that sense, the designer is a genius. This extremely successful design in that sense. Obviously, they're doing well. It's sold out, right? I've had this thing for a bit, and it just is so weird. I can't wait to tell you guys about it. Let's go ahead and measure it. The overall length is coming in at you could, there's a little nub sticking out the back, which is part of the disassembly mechanism. You could call it right at 8 inches, but if you're going to the butt of the frame, it's technically 7.85 inches overall. Oh, we got to measure the blade. We can't go without that. Okay, so the blade is 3.65 at the base, 3.5 to the middle of the frame, and about 3.5 inches, maybe 3.45 inches in terms of cutting edge. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons up against the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Ontario Rat Model 2. Right about in between. this still feels like a full-size knife to me for a lot of different reasons, right? So if you're worried that it's like small, it's not. It's not. It feels very full-size. Not XL, right? Cold Steel fans, calm down. Not XL. It feels like a full-size knife. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Right about in between. And then last but not least, let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue, and the Benchmade Bug Out, which is evading me. There it is, right there. Alrighty. How is the action on this knife? Usually, a lot of times, when you look at knives like this, you think, okay, it looks really interesting, but really, like, how well does it function? Here's another thing that I think should be obvious. Number one, is this knife made in a way where you could actually use it? Absolutely. If that's confusing to anybody, which, by the way, that makes perfect sense. Like, if you're new and you're looking at this and you're like, this is obviously art, it's not actually functional, that's a pretty common, like, I mean, there are good reasons to think that about certain things. It's often something that's, in this territory of the knife world, it's often a thought that occurs with people who are very new. And there's a good reason to think that, because there are definitely art knives that exist, right? This is not a delicate knife, and it's not a knife that's made in a way that can't be used. Like, does the locking mechanism work? Absolutely. Is the edge sharp? Absolutely. Is it made out of premium materials? Absolutely. But are the materials heat treated correctly? Absolutely. If you really wanted to, you could use this knife, definitely. It's not as convenient as the other 10 billion designs that we have out there that are much more reasonably priced and much more ergonomic and have better cutting geometry. For a lot of reasons, this is still definitely an enthusiast object, and that should be very much apparent. But in case it's not, I'll point that out. I think the people who are really interested in this knife know exactly what it is and why they would want to buy it. But this is the kind of stuff that you have to point that out, right? Because there's always a few people who just are not really sure. But anyways, the action, you are meant to, these are like door handles, but they work. I mean, it's not like the most comfortable, like organic deployment. I'm holding on to something that feels like it was less designed for a human hand and more designed for like a robot tentacle. I'm not like something that plugs into something else, right? But it does work. You can manipulate it, and actually, you can reverse flick it. You can kick it out with your thumb. You can wheel it out. It's also very smooth. I was like, wow, that's pretty good. It'll break in. And to my surprise, I look in there, and holy moly, the thing's running on freaking washers. This is some of the smoothest washer action that I've ever felt. Mr. Declynx, who I am almost certain that I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, and Rike are actually able to achieve this out. Now, this is really beneficial because if you decided to actually use this knife, which is probably not going to be the case with this one, right, for most people. Some people will, right? I'm sure there's a few people out there who will buy this and use it. If you chose to use this in a dusty or dirty environment, an environment with a lot of micro debris, the benefit of washers is that it keeps that debris out of the pivot, unlike bearings. It takes a lot of debris to slow bearings down, but it can happen, right? So there's usually a trade-off, but man, the action is stunning, and it's just really impressive. So, if you were aware that that's not really the mark of premiumness, right? There's not like a line, like once you pass a certain line, like you're only going to see bearings. No, because we see bearings in, $40 knives nowadays. If you're aware of that, then you'll be really impressed to hear that they managed to get the action or the pivot smoothness pretty spectacular on a washer knife. But I do need to be clear about this. Deploying this and manipulating it is still nowhere near as easy as manipulating something like the Ritter Hogue or something that was designed to be substantially more, that was actually designed as a practical cutting tool, right? There's a lot of things here that they went design first, function second, and that's okay because they still managed to make it functional. But they were catering to people who like this kind of stuff, right? Who've kind of gone through the first steps of the knife user enthusiast collector world, and maybe they've gotten bored with some of the simpler elements of just regular practical cutting tools, right? I mean, there's an overabundance of those things. They're everywhere. It's pretty easy to figure out what's going to work as a practical tool and what's not. And I think they cater directly to people who are just wanting something more, something extra, something fun. And in that sense, they did a really good job. The lock bar access it's there. I mean, they managed to, they got this a step up over the frame so you can still manipulate it. And, unfortunately for lefties, there's nowhere to mount the clip. There's no hardware anywhere. But if you were to attempt to manipulate this with your left hand, you'll be able to do it. We need to move on here. I've got so much to say about this. Carry profile, thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It is a little, maybe just a hair thicker. Not much. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3 if you're going to put this thing in your pocket. Lengthwise is a little longer than the Para 3, not by much. Height, nowhere near as tall. Same thing. It's just more extreme versus the PM2, nowhere near as long or tall. Materials. What are we looking at here? We're looking at M390, should say right there. Properly heat-treated M390. If you look on their website, it says they heat-treat this to 61. There's not even a range. They're just like 61. So in my head, that means 60 to 62, which is actually, that's great. That's where we should be hitting it. If that's actually true, then nice. Thank you to whoever was involved, whether it was a Rike decision, whether it was a Declynx decision, whoever made that decision to get that number there. Nice. Even though the vast majority of people, I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think the people who are picking this thing up are probably not going to use it. But for the people who do, right, let's say there's just 4 of them. Well, then they got a heat treat that is, in my opinion, in the appropriate range. So that's really nice, and I wanted to point that out. We have titanium, quite a bit of it. And then the internals here, because there's an internal liner that's nested into the titanium, that's steel. So they don't have a titanium liner with a steel lock bar insert. They just have a steel liner, but that's fine. There's a substantial amount of titanium, and the machining, while at first glance appears very simple, is actually very complex. And this requires, I think, quite a bit of effort and obviously quite a bit of design work. So it's really cool. But that's what we're looking at for materials. There is a little bit of weight reduction on those nested steel liners. They have milled them out just a little bit. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But the weight on this guy is a totally reasonable 4.55 ounces, right? It's not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio with the blade length, but that's okay. Doesn't need to be. Let's do a hardware check. I'll get out my tool. I'm kidding. Obviously this is not something that you're going to use. Well, truthfully, there actually are torque screws on the inside of it. This has a special way of disassembling. This is part of the cool process here. And you know, whoever you are, I think, you know, it'll be easy to understand that there was a lot of extra effort in designing this knife in a way that allowed it to be taken apart and reassembled in this way. This is absolutely 100% part of the cost. You cannot reduce this thing simply to materials because it is wildly different and more complicated than your typical sandwich or pillar construction Chinese titanium and M390 liner lock or frame lock. So I want you guys to keep that in mind when we talk about the price. But before we move on, I'm going to it's a screen recorded video that I got permission to use from Rike. But I'm going to show you guys exactly how this knife disassembles because it's pretty cool. All right. As you guys saw there, we have some screws on the inside, and I don't think he took the pivot out, but you obviously can remove the pivot if you want to, so you can get in there and clean everything. But, you know, overall, the disassembly process is fairly easy if you do it correctly. I reviewed the Rike Lamella, and it also has a little latch at the back that you're supposed to use a tool to. I did it in a stupid way, and I ended up needing stitches. That actually, a lot of you actually remember when that happened. And this, I still have the scar on the end of my thumb to prove it there. But that sucked. There was a month or so there where I had a Band-Aid over my thumb, and I could not use it to deploy. I didn't have any feeling in my thumb at all. That has led me to be kind of afraid of this, but I recognize that was my mistake. So if you're going to disassemble this knife, just understand, I made a mistake in using the wrong tool and doing it the wrong way, and I ended up with stitches. That was mostly out of my own stupidity. But I would still, err on the side of caution when doing that. The overall process shouldn't be too complicated, but it is not an orthodox means of disassembling your knife. So, anyways, let's go ahead and measure blade stock thickness, and then we can finally start talking about this absolutely insane design. Blade stock thickness at its, God, it just tapers immediately from, this is so weird. Okay, I think from the, see what I mean? It tapers, it starts to taper immediately. The entire thing. There's no flat. There's no flat. The flat does not exist. Okay. 145 thousandths or so. Something right around there. Fairly thick blade. All right. Let's talk about this freaking thing. Let me tell you guys right off the bat. I think this is super cool. I like it as a knife enthusiast, but I fully recognize that, once again, this is not the most practical thing in the world. And when you pay for this, when you fork over the big bucks for this, you are buying something that is definitely art. It is definitely the designer showing off, hey, this came out of my brain and it actually works. And it's also Rike showing off, look at what we're capable of manufacturing. Holy crap. To get all of this to work correctly is pretty awesome. I think that's pretty commendable. Whether you love this design or you hate it, I think we can all agree it's pretty impressive. I like how this looks. I actually think it looks really cool. And, I'm a knife reviewer and I handle like a crap load of stuff. Way too much, way too many knives, right? So I get bored with the same thing over and over and over again. So something like this, maybe you show this to me 5, 6, 7 years ago and I would have been like, I have no idea. But now, as someone who's bored of the same types of stuff over and over and over again, I find this to be an extremely appealing and just very interesting. It's a conversation piece. It's a really, you don't see stuff like this. And, so for that reason, I think it's really cool. How are the ergonomic lines on this? I mean, it looks exactly like how it would feel. Like if you're imagining how this feels, it's a lot like grabbing a tiny Cybertruck. It has a place for your hand that is not the blade. And that's as far as it goes. It's nothing is necessarily like pointing up into my palm, but I can feel all these edges. There are hard angles and you're going to feel those. And the designer obviously was like, listen, they got to be there. The angles got to be there because it's part of the design, right? It's not going to be the most comfortable. If you're going to take this thing out and you're going to use it barehanded for 30 minutes at a time, that's going to hurt. It's not going to be, this is very rectangly. It's lots of rectangles sort of smashed into each other. So ergonomically, obviously not going to be the best thing, but it is usable. Like if you really want to, you can use it. You can get up there behind the edge too, which is kind of cool. Man, all of the different angles here are so, I know there's a word for this, like the geometric aesthetics. The aesthetic geometry. It just looks like it's just like, I don't know exactly how to, I'm at a loss for words. My vocabulary is failing me so hard right now because I've never seen anything like this, but it is so cool. Every line has a purpose. It connects with another line. And the entire theme of that's the thing when I talk about design, it can be ugly, it can be pretty, it can be simple, it could be complex, however you're going to define it, right? Eye of the beholder. But the thing that I find appealing, whatever the aesthetic is when it all follows the same theme. Nothing looks out of place on this knife, in my opinion. Everything looks like it is specifically supposed to be part of this knife. It is so specific to the knife that if you took any part of this knife and tried to put it on any other knife in existence, it would look weird or out of place. It's like all of these shapes and pieces only make sense when they're together and take exactly this form. So I guess in that sense, I feel like this is an appealing aesthetic design. Even if you don't like how it looks, it still is neat that it all comes together and ends up like this. The cutting geometry, does that make sense? Nope. Nope, but that clearly wasn't the goal. We have There's a little straight edge right here, and then it's a change in angle. You know, you almost could say that this looks like a as it did GTC. Yeah, it almost looks like a lot of people might, I think will point out that say like, well, there is another designer that does things similarly, and it's the guy behind GTC. And I would say, yeah, that's about as close as it gets, but this is still obviously doing its own thing. I think that GTCs tend to be a bit busier. They still have their own language, right? But we have this straight line here, and then it starts to go up. Furthermore, directly above that, you can see that there's a straight line, and that line, well, I was going to say it goes down, but it just doesn't come up as quickly as this one. So this area between the apex and where what would be the flat, but it tapers, right? I mean, look at this. You can see it on the spine. It tapers. This line doesn't come up at the same angle. So this area right here, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So the edge gets thicker and thicker and thicker as it comes out here. What specifically is this going to be useful for? I don't think that the designer had any of that in mind. They just were trying to make something that looked very, very different, and they achieved that, right? That's going to be hard for some people to understand, right? If you're a pure knife user and every knife has to be a functional tool, well, this exists along with, if you didn't know, I would say tens of thousands of designs spanning at least 3 decades, probably more, right? Bizarre things exist in the past that are, the elements have nothing to do with function, right? So you can kick and scream and cry and complain and why would anyone ever make this? You can do that, but it's not going to do anything. I always make the example that you can stand on railroad tracks with a wiffle bat if you want to, but the outcome is not going to be in your favor, right? There are plenty of functional designs out there. You have so many that you will never, ever be able to discover them all before you turn to dust. So don't waste your time complaining about stuff like this, you silly, silly goofball. You freaking spaghetti wizard. Don't waste your time. I think this is cool. Will it slice and cut? Yes. Yes, it will. It actually does it better than you would think, right? Let's try this initial edge down here, which I think is actually the thinnest edge. Not bad. Let's slice all the way out. It definitely gets a little bit, it doesn't want to do it exactly the same way, but does it slice out to the tip? Yes, it does, but you can see as we go down, this is a fairly clean slice, and as we come out here, we can see, oh, it's starting to lip over, and that's the result of the edge getting thicker and thicker and thinker. Definitely. What sort of shape do we call this? A double sheep's cliff modified Tanto reverse? No idea. I don't know, right? Who knows? It's interesting. It actually has a few different wonky blade shapes that you can choose from, and none of them are anywhere near anything that we've labeled before. But I think that's kind of neat. It has the Rike logo right here, which I got to be honest with this particular design. Usually, this is pretty minimal. They have Cybertrix, they get M39, there's a weird code on there. With something like this, I really prefer that there's nothing on it. I really think they should be putting this stuff on the inside of the frame, or at least on the inside, like where you don't see that part of the blade. Because I want nothing more than just to look at this knife, to just soak in its weirdness, right? I mean, that's why you clicked on this video, because the thumbnail just looks bizarre. A lot of people clicked on this video not even knowing that it was a knife, right? I mean, who knows what it is? It looks folded up. This could be a lot of different things. But yeah, I wish that they hadn't put anything on there. I do appreciate that there are no, there's no fasteners that are visible at all. Like, literally none. The pivot, the body screws, anything that's involved with the disassembly, it's all underneath. And it's inaccessible until you lift that latch, which is pretty cool. There's really no way to lose anything on this knife. I mean, if the only way to lose things is if you were intentionally trying to break it. But without that latch being lifted, the thing simply is not going to come apart. It holds itself together. And there's no way to accidentally do that. You can't like fumble it in your hand and whoops, it came apart. It's not going to happen like that. Not that that is a regular occurrence with pocket knives, but yeah, it's just not a possibility. The pocket clip is needlessly long, which is almost a silly thing to complain about because, again, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not going to carry this and use it. I'm sure there's somebody who's going to. So for the few people who will buy this and actually carry and use it, I think you'll find that the pocket clip length is a little ridiculous. I think it could have been about right here. But maybe the designer was like, no, I really wanted it to just be wild and crazy. You know, it's possible that the designer was like, yeah, I know it's too long, but I did the whole thing. I mean, were we really going to complain about the clip length? Like, there's a bunch of other things that don't make any sense, like the blade, right? From a functional standpoint. So in and out of the pocket, though, it does come in and out fairly easy other than the incredibly long pull, right? I mean, you got to pull this thing, you know, from freaking Texas to Canada to get it out of your pocket. But it's, you know, the retention on the pocket clip is good. It's very good. Very shallow at the end of the bill. It actually starts to drop a little bit down, so you're going to have to finagle a little bit with your pocket seam. And then the carry depth, that's all that's going to be sticking up out of the pocket is just right there. No lanyard apparatus. Sorry, folks. Stop pin. It's not really a pin at all. In fact, it's just the back of the spacer there. But it works, right? I mean, you can see the little contact mark right here. It definitely works. There's no blade play, up, down, left, or right. There is no hint of lock stick. No pivot lash. Very smooth. God, I just can't believe it's washers. That's nuts. Detent, very nice. Perfect. Centering, perfect. This is a marvel. This is a design and machining marvel. I'm pretty sure Rike has a lot of superpowers that just don't exist. You know, I've seen some impressive things this last year from Riot and Maxace. The most impressive production machine work that I have ever seen has been Rike more than once. The Lamella was the first, like, WTF, how, you know? But it's a combination of Rike's ability to, because you can't be sloppy with something like this. You can't just be like, oh, dum-de-doo-de-doo, right? There's going to be people saying, I mean, look down on the comments of this video. There's going to be people trying to oversimplify it, like, well, if you understand, if you are someone on the mental plane, the equivalent mental plane such as myself, the King Spaghetti Wizard, then you'll realize it's actually quite simple. Shut up. You didn't design this. Shut your face. Just shut up. I know. Don't tell me it's an imaginary argument either, because they are everywhere. This channel gets 85,000 comments a year, bare minimum. Don't tell me, and that's a real number. Imagine having 3,600 uploads and YouTube Studio notifies you of every single comment and then puts them in order so you can see every comment from every video everywhere on your channel all at once. Don't tell me these people don't exist. You have no idea. You have no idea. They're everywhere. There's an army of them. People trying to oversimplify this stuff for nothing more than the bolstering of their own ego. No, it is not simple. This is definitely complicated, and it is definitely not something that we normally see in the knife world. I'm very impressed by this. The price tag, ouch. Oh, it's an impressive knife, but my goodness, that is a hefty price tag. You know, I feel like in my head it's like it is impressive, right? Do I feel like it's so hard to put my finger on how I feel about the price tag because I haven't actually seen anything like this. It is made in China, right? So we know that. It's not an integral, but it also has machining that might be the equivalent of machining an entire integral. I don't really know. I know there's a lot of work in this. There's more work than a typical frame lock, right? So we can't say this is a $200 knife or $250 knife. I think it's at least a $350 knife. So it's right in there. I can't say I'm super duper unhappy that I hate the price tag, right? It's just, wow, that's expensive for something that is definitely 100% designed to cater to the enthusiast. Is this a recommendable knife? No. No, the vast majority of people, this is not recommendable at all. This is specifically for people who are collectors and enthusiasts. Somebody who, needs a, dependable cutting tool day in and day out. You got a bajillion options. You shouldn't even be looking at this, right? If you're looking at this, you're a knife enthusiast. You're a collector. You're one or the other or both. Definitely, right? That's who this was meant for. I don't think they made very many. I don't think they plan to make a whole lot more. So that's who it's for. If you are a collector enthusiast and you're looking for something weird, looking for something different, looking for something that's made in a way that's impressive, that they just managed to do it, whether or not they needed to, right? We're going to get the, scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they never stopped to think if they should. Shut up. That's not funny anymore. That's old. You could say that about anything, right? I'm glad that, of course, they should have, right? Otherwise, everything would look like this. Yay. We got enough Civivi Elementums. I'm glad that this exists. I can recommend this to people who are hardcore collectors and enthusiasts. Outside of that, no, obviously there's a lot of other things. So, very cool, though. I'm proud to own this. I think that this is very neat. Anyways, thanks so much to Rike for sending this in. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.